Hello once again. This is your professor, Danny Araneta Cabulay, on the course Accounting Information Systems. We're currently in video lecture number 4, and we are talking here about chapter 3, which is basically about ethics, fraud, and internal controls. And we're now in part 2 of that chapter. And we will be talking about a lot of stuff concerning fraud. And one of the things that rocked the financial community in the early 2000s was the Enron case, which we discussed in the previous video. And one of the things that came out of that investigation was the legislation called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 in the United States. Its principal reforms pertain to, number one, creation of a Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or the PCAOB, auditor independence, more separation between a firm's attestation and non-auditing activities. Ibig sabihin, hindi tayo pwede, kung tayo ay isang auditor, external auditor, hindi pwede na tayo yung gumawa ng accounting system for a particular company, tapos tayo rin ang kukunin na external auditor. Isn't that a bit conflict of interest? Because can we audit ourselves? Medyo mahirap yun, right? Corporate governance and responsibility. Audit committee members who are essentially part of the board of directors of a corporation must be independent, and the audit committee must oversee the external auditors. So usually, maganda kung merong isang board member sa ating board of directors na nakakaintindi ng external audit process, preferably a CPA. So siya ang mag-head ng audit committee, which is one of the essential requirements of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Disclosure requirements. So, dati, pag gumagawa tayo ng financial reports, pag gumawa tayo ng mga reports like income statement, now called the Statement of Comprehensive Income, or and balance sheet, which is now known as Statement of Financial Position, and the Statement of Stockholders' Equity, that could run up to maybe 5 to 6 pages, right? And it's all tables. But now, a larger portion of the financial report or the audit report of auditors is the disclosure section. So, nakapaloob doon yung mga dapat malaman ng isang investor, ng isang stockholder, or any other interested party. Kasi baka mamaya, behind those accounts that we see, the amounts that we see in each account title, there are certain information that we need to know that will allow us to make a crucial decision. Let's say to invest or not to invest, to divest or not to divest, etc., etc. So, very important yung disclosure. Okay? So, that's for the sake of transparency and integrity. New federal crimes for the destruction of or tampering for documents, securities fraud, and actions against whistleblowers. So, whistleblowers are in a way protected by this law. And because of public interest, bawal magsira ng mga documents. Just like what they did in the Enron case. They were shredding vital evidence. No? And that's technically obstruction of justice. In the Philippines, we have that kind of provision in our laws. Now, sometimes fraud can be committed by employees and sometimes by management. So when you talk about employee fraud, this would mean fraud was committed by a non-management personnel. So this could be a supervisor or a rank and file employee. Wala siyang managerial powers. So pwede siya yung nagnakaw sa company, like yung mga cashiers, cash custodians, no? Or any other employee in that level. Usually consist of an employee taking cash or any other asset for personal gain by circumventing a company's system of internal controls. I remember, marami akong naging kliyente ng mga restaurants and hotels. You know, the number one reason bakit bumabagsak ang isang hotel o ang isang restaurant, lalo na kung ito ay maliit lang, is pilferage. Pilferage, yan yung hindi mo ninanakaw yung cash. Ang ninanakaw mo dyan, mga gamit ng hotel. Ang ninanakaw mo, mga pagkain, mga supplies, kahit nga sa mga opisina, di ba? Pag break time, yung mga empleyado, gumagawa ng mga CV, ng mga resume, kasi nag-a-apply sila sa ibang company, and yet they use the bond paper, the different stationery and supplies and computer ink of the company. That is a form of pilferage. Pag nanakaw sa company rin yun. Eh di lalo na kung inuuwi mo isang ream ng bond paper para sa project ng anak mo o para may supplies ka sa bahay. That is a form of pilferage. At kung madalas ginagawa yan at maraming tao ang gumagawa niyan, let's say maraming empleyado, it's been a culture to pilfer inventories of the company or supplies of the company, kawawa naman yung company. Collectively, lumalaki ang kanilang purchases, lumalaki ang kanilang expenses, and that will get into the way of a bloated cost of sales. So you see, employee fraud can be rampant, no? Especially if it's not detected and many people are tolerating it and they connive with the security personnel, security guards are just okay with it, that's a problem. Now, in contrast, pag sinabi naman natin na management fraud, ito yung pagnanakaw sa kumpanya na ang gumawa ay isang tao na merong kapangyarihan. May power siya, mayroon siyang managerial power. So this could mean a department head, a functional head, or a director, a vice president or assistant vice president, or a top guy like a president or general manager. Is that possible? Hindi ba malalaki na ang sweldo nila? Yes, very possible because of greed, because of corrupt practices, or maybe lack of integrity. That's why these high-salaried employees would commit fraud. Okay? Kaya makita mo yung lifestyle check, very important. Kasi magkano ba ang sweldo ng isang manager, tapos biglang nakabili ng isang mansyon within 1 year. They need to earn that kind of money for 10 to 15 years. Pero in 1 year, nakabili na ng mansion. So, nakakapagtaka. Unless na meron siyang minana, inheritance, or meron siyang malaking investment outside, apart from his salary, then that is not possible. Okay? So, this is a crime perpetrated at levels of management above the one to which internal control structure relates. Okay? So sometimes, ino-override ng mga managers yung mga internal controls. Meron silang ganyang power. It frequently involves using financial statements to create an illusion that an entity is more healthy and prosperous than it actually is. So in short, dinodoktor ang mga figures at the highest level. And when that happens, millions up to billions could be missing. Okay? It also involves misappropriation of assets. Yung mga pera, mga gamit ng isang kumpanya, ginagamit sa maling paraan. At itinatago siya. Hindi siya nagiging transparent. It frequently is shrouded in a maze, complex business transactions. Kaya dapat kasi yung ating mga transactions, it should be simple, easy to understand. Pag ginawa siyang very, very complicated, asahan mo, merong intention to fool people. There is an intention to hide something. Kaya, the best way is to simplify your accounting process, your accounting transactions. The forms should be easy to read. Okay? If it's not like that, that's a red flag, actually. Now, maraming klase ng fraud schemes. Okay? 3 categories mainly are, according to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, or CFE. By the way, that's a qualification for fraud examiners, CFE. So if you're interested to take that, even if you're not a CPA, you can actually take that exam. Okay? Kasi outside the CPA license, there's nothing that would stop you from taking in additional qualifications like CIA, Certified Internal Auditor, CFA, Certified Financial Analyst, and CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner. So according to the ACFE, there are 3 categories of fraud schemes. First is fraudulent statements. Something is wrong with the reports. No? It's not accurate. It's not fairly presented. It's deceiving. Corruption. And corruption could be best seen in the different day-to-day practices of companies. The way they handle their transactions, the way they fill up the forms and apply good accounting principles. Maybe they're doing the opposite or they're modifying it, and the way they deal with stakeholders. And finally, the third category would be asset misappropriation. So this could be cash or non-cash assets, and they're misused in some other way, not the normal way. Okay, remember those three fraud schemes. Now, when you talk about fraudulent statements, this could mean misstating the financial statements to make the copy appear better than it is. So maybe it's like a form of window dressing. It usually occurs as management fraud because sino bang pwede magpalit nun? Sino bang pwede dagdagan mo yung ating liabilities or bawasan mo yung ating depreciation? Who dictates all of that? Management, isn't it? Maybe tied to focus on short-term financial measures for success. Para lang masabi na successful ang operations, very financially healthy ang company, they're going to take some measures to on a short term, to actually fix some of the figures. They may also be related to management bonus packages being tied to financial statements. So alam mo, yung mga bonuses na mga performance bonus ng mga executives, nakadepende sa financial statements. Pag maganda yung financial statements, lalakihan nila yung kanilang bonus. Pero the truth is, hindi naman kumita yung company. Dinoktor lang nila yung mga financial statements para magmukhang financially healthy yung company. So magkakamal sila ng mga performance bonus. That is a kind of fraud. They're manipulating their own salaries and incentives. And it could also mean that they are in control of their own incentives. Okay? Siyempre, aprobahan nila na lakihan ng bonus nila kasi sila yung makikinabang. Okay? Now, another type of fraud would be corruption. And corrupt practices are plenty in organizations. For example, bribery, extortion, illegal gratuities, yung nagbibigay ng tip na masyadong napakalaki, conflict of interest, economic extortion, okay? And many, many others. Kung minsan nga, merong mga tinatawag na ghost employees. Sa Davao City, yan yung allegation ni Senator Trillanes against President Duterte na nagkamal siya ng ilang billions na nakadeposit sa Julia Vargas account. And the root cause is, kaya lumaki ng ganyan, lumobo yan, either nanggaling sa drugs or nanggaling sa payola, yung tinatawag natin na ghost employees ng Davao City when President Duterte was still mayor of Davao. That's an allegation by Senator Trillanes that still is to be proven. But come to think of it, if you're mayor for 23 years and you have, let's say, 1,000 ghost employees, and every month may kumukubra ng sweldo ng mga peking empleyado na yan, that could really amount to billions. So maaring totoo yung allegation. Pero ayaw pa buksan sa AMLAC yung laman ng bangko na yan. Okay? At makita yung tracer, like what were the movements that went into that bank account. Actually, it's a joint account with her daughter. No? So it's something that needs to be investigated. And the daughter is now running for president. Good luck. Okay? So examples of corruption, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977. This could be indicative of corruption in the business world. No? Grabe na kasi nangyayari. Hindi lang sa Pilipinas, sa buong mundo. Okay? So many scandals are happening in big companies around the world. This is impacted accounting by requiring accurate records and internal control. So dalawa yan, no? Kailangan yung records natin accurate at saka yung internal controls natin stringent. Pag one of them is weak, then there's an opportunity for corrupt practices to flourish. Now, the third type of fraud is asset misappropriation. Here, the most common type of fraud and often occurs as an employee fraud. No? Kasi yung mga kahera kung minsan kumukupit, no? O yung mga ibang cash custodians, they tend to spend the money that they collected instead of depositing it to the bank account of the company. Examples of asset misappropriation: making charges to expense accounts to cover theft of asset, especially cash. Lapping, yung tumanggap ka ng pera pero hindi mo i-deposito, gagamitin mo muna. next week mo na lang siya i-deposit. Yan. So, dinedelay mo, ginagamit mo muna yung pera. So, transaction fraud, deleting, altering, or adding false transactions to steal assets. For example, yung isang particular gadget na binili, 1,000 pesos lang, pero dinagdagan mo ng zero sa huli, naging 10,000 na. So, technically, you bloated the amount 10 times. And that's a form of transaction fraud. Okay? Because you added something, a zero at the end. Okay? So, those are examples of fraud that could be committed in a company. Now, when you talk about internal control objectives, according to the American Institute of CPAs, SAS, well, these are the objectives. Number one, internal controls are important because you need to safeguard assets of the company. You need to ensure accuracy and reliability of accounting records and information because of public trust. You need to promote efficiency of the firm's operations, measure compliance with management's prescribed policies and procedures, which is measured through compliance audit. And how do you modify assumptions to the internal control objectives? Okay, well, that is based on management responsibility. So, management is responsible for making sure that the internal control objectives are achieved, and you can modify your assumptions depending on the policy or standards of the company. The establishment and maintenance of a system of internal control is the sole responsibility of management. Kapag mahina ang internal control ng isang company, management is to be blamed for that because they allowed it to happen. Okay? Reasonable assurance is also an important assumption. This means the cost of achieving the objectives of internal control should outweigh its benefits. Sabi nila, wag na tayong mag-hire ng additional guard or wag na tayong maglagay ng CCTV camera, etc., etc. Gastos lang yan. Yeah, there is a cost to every internal control measure that you implement, but if the benefits are greater, it should outweigh the cost. Okay? So, what if you did not install those gadgets? What if you did not install any CCTV camera system or hire additional security personnel? What is the worst thing that could happen? And how much will be the potential damage to the company? So again, you ask the question, are these security or internal control measures ultimately more beneficial than they are costly? So you weigh the cost and the benefit. And then the methods of data processing is something that you need to take into consideration also. The techniques of achieving the objectives will vary with different types of technology. Some companies are really fully high-tech, some are in the middle, and some are really manual. You still doing the manual system. So again, with whichever method of data processing you use, you should be able to adapt and make sure that the objectives are met despite your technology, low-tech or high-tech. Now, what are the limitations of internal control? Does it mean that when we have a full-blown internal control system, that fraud will not happen? Not necessarily, but at least it will mitigate, it will also prevent, it will also cast doubt on fraudsters if they have to pursue or not a plan to defraud the company. So it is a deterrent. No? So, but there are limitations to internal control. It is not foolproof though. There's a possibility of honest errors. And honest errors are okay because intentional errors could be fraud. Okay? Circumvention via collusion. Ibig sabihin, pag nagkutsabahan na, kahit na stricto ang internal control, pag nagkutsabahan na, they can actually go around the internal controls. But there should be a strict detection technique. Okay? Management override. Yan ginagamit ng mga managers, lalo na kung, for example, there's an emergency or there's a sort of urgent need to do it, to use the override. Why not? It's within management prerogative. But the person who will do the management override should be trustworthy. Otherwise, it is prone to abuse. Changing conditions. Sometimes if the environment, the situation, the climate would change. Some internal controls could be useless or could be weak, okay? Especially in companies with high growth activities, no? Pag grabe ang expansion, maraming mga bagong policies na pinapatupad, yung mga internal control system na naiiwanan, na nagiging outdated siya. That's why the internal audit department and the audit committee should always be abreast with changes, internal changes as well as external developments, so they can continuously update the internal control policies of the company as well as the entire system to go with the tide, no? Lalo na kung maraming mga developments na nangyayari. Huwag dapat maiwanan ng internal control. Now, what would be the risk, no, of a weak internal control? Okay? So ito yung tinatawag natin ng mga exposure. Magiging expose ang ating financial health kapag mahina ang internal control ng isang company. Okay? So pwedeng masira ang isang asset, mawala, pwedeng nakawin, theft, pwede ring makorrupt ang information, babalikuin ang mga data to suit a very devious plan, or disruption of the information system. Matitigil ang processing ng mga data at information because they're going to implement that fraudulent plan. Okay? So remember, yan ang pwede mangyari kapag mahina ang ating internal control. So, importante yan kasi nagiging shield siya laban sa mga pwedeng mangyari sa company. Imagine mo yung eroplano na nagbabagsak ng mga bomba, tapos wala kang protection, yung assets mo might be destroyed. Okay? Or your asset mo pwedeng mawala, isang iglap. Okay? So again, you need internal control as a shield to protect your assets, safeguard your assets. Remember, gusto natin meron tayong preventive controls para hindi mangyari ang fraud, detective controls para madali nating mahuli kung may gagawin na kalokohan o pagnanakaw, and finally, corrective controls para kung nahuli na natin, alam na natin yung gagawin natin. We can rectify the situation and we can further prevent it from happening in the future. Okay, remember? Preventive controls, detective controls, and corrective controls should be in place. Bigyan ko kayo ng mga example. Halimbawa, yung pag-check ng work ng mga supervisors, no? Who checks the work of supervisors? Managers. Who checks the work of rank and file people? The supervisors. So you see the 3 layers there. Supervisors check the work of rank and file, but the managers check the work of supervisors. So those 2 levels of checking are necessary to prevent mistakes, to prevent errors, to prevent fraud. Okay? Now, yan ay isang example ng preventive control. Then, nag-install tayo ng mga CCTV cameras to make sure that should anything wrong happen, we can trace it, we can find out who did it. There is a record, an electronic record of the transaction. So that is a detective control, the CCTV camera. And then, new policies, are updated continuously to make sure that we can correct previous mistakes. If that policy was weak, we can strengthen that. So there is that oversight committee that corrects also mistakes. Okay? So you have now a corrective control. Okay? So preventive, which is the separation of duties and review of the work of subordinates. Then you have the completely wired environment, which is our detective control. And then you have revision of policies as our corrective measure. Okay? Now, for your recitation number 5, also pop quiz number 5, I want you to answer one question only. In 40 words, try to write an article a short essay, maybe 4 to 5 sentences, one paragraph. Why is it more difficult to detect fraud that is committed by a high-ranking officer of the company than fraud that is committed by an ordinary employee? Bakit nga ba? Okay? So I'll see you next in the next video lecture, which is video lecture number 5. Okay? Stick around. Bye!